Picture this. It's a moonless night in old Istanbul. The waters of the Bosphorus are calm and black until a heavy sack splashes into the waves. Then another, and another. In total, 280 sacks are tossed into the sea like garbage, each one writhing with a terrified woman inside. Their muffled screams and desperate struggles are swallowed by the cold water. Overlooking this nightmare is the Sultan himself, watching as 280 of his concubines, the women of his harem, disappear beneath the waves in a single, horrific night. Sounds like a twisted legend or a horror movie, right? Brace yourself. This really happened. What kind of ruler would commit such an unspeakable act? Meet Sultan Ibrahim, better known as Ibrahim the Mad. He was the Ottoman Sultan from 1640 to 1648, and his story is so shocking that you'll have to remind yourself it's real history. In this video, we're diving deep into one of the darkest chapters of the Ottoman Empire, a tale of absolute power, paranoia, and madness spiraling out of control. Why is this grim story important for you? Because it's a massive cautionary tale. It shows the extreme dangers of unchecked power and mental instability at the top. Lessons that remain relevant even today. And by the end of this video, you'll see how one man's insanity destroyed hundreds of lives and ultimately led to his own downfall. Stay tuned, because this story only gets crazier the further we go, and you won't believe the ending. To understand how we got to that terrible night, we need to look at Ibrahim's early life. Even before he wore the crown, Ibrahim's upbringing was beyond abnormal. It was downright inhumane. As a young prince, Ibrahim didn't grow up free in the palace gardens. He spent 21 years locked in a gilded cage, literally. Ottoman princes of the time were often confined to a section of the palace called the cafes, or cage, to prevent them from plotting coups or being a threat to their ruling relatives. Imagine being trapped in luxurious isolation for decades. No freedom, constant fear, and every so often hearing news that one of your brothers or nephews was executed so you wouldn't challenge the throne. This was Ibrahim's childhood. By the time he was in his 20s, Ibrahim had watched his brothers be murdered one by one on the orders of the previous sultan. Each death fueled his paranoia that he'd be next. In 1640, when Sultan Murad IV, Ibrahim's older brother, died, guards came to fetch Ibrahim and proclaim him the new sultan. But Ibrahim was so damaged by trauma that he refused to leave his cage. He thought it was a trick to execute him. Only after they showed him Murad's lifeless body as proof did Ibrahim believe he was truly safe to take the throne. This deep psychological scarring, 2 decades of fear and isolation, would soon earn him the nickname the Mad. At first though, nobody knew just how unhinged he really was. When Ibrahim finally became sultan, people hoped he might rule wisely, or at least normally. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Initially, he showed some interest in governing. He even disguised himself to walk among the markets of Istanbul, trying to understand his people. But the scars of his past ran deep, and it didn't take long for Ibrahim's sanity to start cracking. Headaches, mood swings, and bizarre cravings began to consume him. His powerful mother, Kusem Sultan, noticed Ibrahim's unstable behavior and came up with a plan: distract him with pleasures. After all, an Ottoman sultan was expected to produce heirs and enjoy the harem. Maybe indulging in the harem would keep his dark impulses at bay. Well, it backfired, big time. Ibrahim dove into a life of excess and debauchery like a man starved. He filled his harem with hundreds of concubines, indulging in wild orgies and strange fetishes that made the palace corridors buzz with whispers. Short sentences can't even do justice to how outrageously he behaved, but let's try. He lined an entire room with mirrors so he could watch himself amidst dozens of concubines. He called himself a stallion and treated his women like mares in disturbingly literal ways. He even had all the virgins in his harem line up naked in the gardens so he could charge through them like a wild animal. Yes, that really happened. Ibrahim's appetites knew no bounds. He became obsessed with food and flesh. Overweight women especially caught his fancy. The larger, the better. He sent scouts to find the fattest women in the empire and bring them to his palace. One legendary concubine was so large and enticing to Ibrahim that he nicknamed her Sugar Cube. Her real name was Shekapare, which literally means piece of sugar. She became one of his favorites, a scheming woman who knew how to keep the Sultan's attention. If you thought things were already off the rails, Ibrahim's extravagances went further. He decorated his beard with diamonds, perfumed the palace with so much ambergris scent that everyone felt dizzy and demanded exotic luxuries at whim. One day, a concubine told him a fanciful story about a sable fur king, and Ibrahim instantly had a new obsession. He ordered his servants to carpet the palace in sable fur. He even had live kittens dressed in tiny sable coats wandering around for his amusement. Sounds insane. It was. And everyone in the palace was either too afraid or too loyal to stop him. All these twisted pleasures were red flags that the Sultan was losing it. But what could anyone do? He was the absolute ruler. His officials, and even his mother Kosum Sultan, could only grit their teeth and hope he'd calm down. Unfortunately, Ibrahim was just getting started. The worst was yet to come. Among Ibrahim's many concubines, one clever woman was about to ignite a catastrophe. Let's talk about Shekapare, that favorite concubine nicknamed Sugar. She wasn't just favored for her figure. She was manipulative and ambitious. She had the Sultan's ear, and she knew exactly how to whisper into it. One fateful night, Shekapare decided to drop a bombshell. In the Sultan's private chambers, she leaned in and told Ibrahim a shocking rumor. She claimed that one of the women in the harem had betrayed him, that a concubine had been sneaking around with another man, an outsider. Think about it. To a man as paranoid and possessive as Ibrahim, this was like lighting a fuse to a powder keg. His eyes went wide, his blood boiled instantly. Another man with his woman. The very thought pushed Ibrahim over the edge. He demanded to know who dared cuckold the Sultan. But Shekapare played coy. She said she wasn't sure who it was, only that she knew it happened. This was all it took. Ibrahim's mind snapped into a rage. He immediately summoned the chief black eunuch, the head guardian of the harem, and ordered an intense investigation. The palace was locked down, no one in or out. Torchlight illuminated the fearful faces of the harem girls as guards interrogated them through the night. Ibrahim wanted a name. He needed a target for his fury. The eunuchs, desperate to please their unhinged master, dragged concubines out of their beds and questioned them harshly. Some women were tortured, twisted painfully or threatened with death, all in an effort to find this supposed lover among them. The atmosphere in the harem turned absolutely nightmarish. Sisters and friends turned on each other in fear, each hoping someone else would confess so the rest might be spared. But no traitor was found. No one confessed. Perhaps because there was no secret lover at all. It was likely a malicious lie. Or if one woman had in fact risked an affair, she died with her lips sealed. In any case, hour after hour, the Sultan received the same infuriating report. "We cannot find the guilty one, Your Majesty." This only fueled Ibrahim's madness further. His mind churned with dark possibilities. Was the entire harem laughing at him behind his back? Was every concubine disloyal? By now, he was far beyond reason. Ibrahim reached a terrifying conclusion. If no one would admit the betrayal, then everyone would pay for it. Cliffhanger? You bet. At this point, even Ibrahim's closest advisors had no idea what he might do next. Unfortunately, they were about to find out, and it was worse than anyone could imagine. Then came the night that would go down in infamy. In a frenzy of outrage and paranoia, Sultan Ibrahim issued a command that defied all sanity. Execute them. All of them. He ordered his entire harem of 280 concubines to be put to death. Yes, you heard that right. He decided to wipe out every single woman in his harem in one swoop. The method? Something as cold and merciless as the act itself. The concubines were to be tied up, sewn into weighted sacks, and drowned in the Bosphorus Strait before dawn. Under the cover of darkness, soldiers and eunuchs carried out the Sultan's orders with brutal efficiency. They rounded up every concubine from the youngest teen to the favorites adorned in jewels. Imagine the chaos. Screaming, crying women dragged from their plush chambers, silken gowns torn in the frenzy, as they realize with horror what is happening. Loyal or traitor, it didn't matter now. Nobody was being spared. The executioners forced each woman into a large burlap sack. Some sacks already had heavy stones in the bottom. Others they weighted down by tying cannonballs or rocks to the cloth. Panic was everywhere. The palace that night echoed with pleas for mercy that fell on deaf ears. Servants who had to assist were trembling. Even the hardened palace guards had never seen anything like this massacre. One by one, the sacks were hauled out to the palace's seaside terrace and nearby boats. Ibrahim watched from a balcony, his face twisted in fury and madness, as his concubines were taken to the water's edge. If any woman begged Ibrahim for forgiveness, he did not listen. Their cries might as well have been the wind. In his mind, they were all guilty of insulting his honor. The executioners began their grim task. They tossed the first sack over the railing into the black Bosphorus below. Splash! It hit the surface and quickly sank, the woman inside vanishing into darkness. Then the next sack, and the next, in a gruesome rhythm. Dozens of weighted bodies plunged into the sea, the splashes muffled by the distance and the night. Some sacks thrashed violently for a few moments as the poor women inside struggled in vain. But soon each one sank, leaving only ripples. The waters that had been calm were now stirring with the last movements of 280 drowning souls. Witnesses later whispered that the Bosphorus that night seemed to scream silently, with all those lives being snuffed out. By the time the sky started to lighten with dawn, it was over. All 280 concubines were gone. The Bosphorus carried their bodies and their fates, the current slowly drifting sacks away into the sea. An entire harem erased in a single night of madness. And Ibrahim? The Sultan simply wiped his hands and went to bed as if he had taken out the trash, convinced he had rid himself of disloyal women. In his deranged state, he likely believed he'd solved a problem and protected his honor. Yet, unbelievably, one woman is said to have survived this horror. Out of 280, one sack did not become a grave. Different stories tell it in different ways. Some say a sack washed ashore and a barely alive concubine was cut free by a passing fisherman. Others say one of Ibrahim's favorites was quietly spared at the last minute. The most common name given to the survivor is Turhan Sultan, a young concubine who also happened to be the mother of Ibrahim's infant son. Whether by luck or by someone's intervention, Turhan lived while her sisters perished. Her survival meant that Ibrahim's heir, little Prince Mehmed, still had his mother. Turhan Sultan would later play a crucial role in the empire, but on this night she gained a more tragic distinction: the sole survivor of Ibrahim's bloodbath. By sunrise, news of the mass drowning spread through the palace like wildfire. Servants whispered in shock. Officials were utterly horrified, and the people of Istanbul would soon hear rumors of the Sultan's atrocity. This was a new low, even for a tyrant. The Ottoman court had seen violence and cruelty before, but 280 women murdered in one night by their own ruler. This was unprecedented and deeply terrifying to everyone. The morning after the massacre, the Ottoman Empire woke up to a dark new reality. Within the palace, absolute fear reigned. Who would be next? If the Sultan could kill his entire harem on a whim, no one was safe from his insanity. The Grand Vizier, the Janissary commanders, the religious clerics, all the power players, realized that Ibrahim was completely out of control. Something had to give. The mass drowning of the concubines was the loudest alarm bell possible, and it rang throughout the empire's leadership. Even Ibrahim's own mother, Qasem Sultan, was aghast at what her son had done. This was the same woman who had maneuvered power for decades, even killing to protect her children in the brutal politics of the court. Yet even she had to face the truth. Her son had gone beyond the pale. She reportedly said, "He will leave neither you nor me alive if he continues like this." Ibrahim was not just a personal embarrassment now. He was a threat to the stability of the entire Ottoman state. The high-ranking religious leader of the empire, the Grand Mufti, was particularly outraged and heartbroken. And not only because of the concubines, Ibrahim had committed yet another atrocity that struck very close to home for the Mufti. Here's what happened. Some time after the harem massacre, Sultan Ibrahim noticed the Grand Mufti's beautiful young daughter during a visit to the public baths. She caught his eye, and being the Sultan, he decided he had to have her. Ibrahim asked the Grand Mufti for his daughter's hand in marriage. Imagine being that father. He knew Ibrahim's reputation all too well. The Mufti politely, but firmly, refused the Sultan's proposal, hoping that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Ibrahim, spoiled and deranged, took the rejection as an insult. In a sickening act of vengeance, he sent his guards to kidnap the girl. The poor young woman was dragged into Ibrahim's harem. There, the Sultan violated and tormented her for several days. When he'd satisfied his cruel urges, he casually sent her back to her father's house, as if returning a borrowed item. It was an unforgivable personal attack on the Grand Mufti's family and honor. The Grand Mufti was livid and devastated. This man was the chief Islamic scholar of the realm. In other words, he was the top religious authority. For him to oppose the Sultan was risky, but now he had nothing to lose. He swore he would never rest until Ibrahim was removed from the throne. And he was not alone. All across the government and military, powerful figures who had tolerated Ibrahim's antics up to now had finally reached their breaking point. The massacre of the concubines, the abuse of the Mufti's daughter, the emptying of the treasury for fur and jewels, the disastrous wars Ibrahim had dragged them into. Enough was enough. They started to conspire in secret. The generals, the viziers, the Mufti, and even Qasem Sultan herself. These people were not natural allies. but Ibrahim's tyranny was the glue binding them together. They plotted to overthrow Ibrahim the Mad. In August of 1648, the plan went into action. It was time to take down the Mad Sultan. The leaders of the Janissaries, the elite military corps, marched through the streets of Istanbul, rallying support. They made their way to Topkapi Palace, not with cheers, but with anger. Civilians, fed up with heavy taxes and horrified by rumors of Ibrahim's deeds, did not stop them. Inside the palace, Kösem Sultan quietly made sure the guards wouldn't fiercely resist. She loved her son, but she knew he had to go for the good of the empire and for her own safety. The palace gates burst open as armed Janissaries swarmed in. Ibrahim, alarmed by the commotion, finally realized too late that his time was up. The very soldiers sworn to protect him were now coming to drag him off the throne. Panicked, Ibrahim tried to hide or rally loyalists, but no one came to defend him, not a single guard. His closest servants had seen his atrocities and had no interest in dying for a lunatic. In a surreal twist of fate, Ibrahim was seized and locked back in the same cage where he'd spent his youth. The once absolute ruler was now a prisoner, trembling in the dark, stripped of power just as swiftly as he'd wielded it. But the story doesn't end with imprisonment. The conspirators knew that leaving Ibrahim alive was far too dangerous. Just days after the coup, the Grand Mufti issued an official fatwa, religious decree, declaring that Ibrahim should be executed for the sake of the realm. Even Kösem Sultan gave her sorrowful approval. This was the only way to ensure he could never return to power. On August 18th, 1648, executioners entered the cage. In keeping with Ottoman tradition for royalty, they carried a silken bowstring. Ottoman sultans believed that royal blood must not be spilled on the ground, so they used strangulation to execute highborn prisoners. Ibrahim, just 33 years old, was strangled to death. The Mad Sultan, who had drowned 280 innocent women, met his own violent end, alone and defeated. It was only the second time in Ottoman history that a reigning sultan had been executed by his own people. That very day, Ibrahim's 6-year-old son, Prince Mehmed, was declared the new sultan, Mehmed IV. And here's a twist. The boy's mother was Turhan Sultan, the concubine who survived the massacre. So the one woman Ibrahim spared, or who escaped his wrath, ended up becoming the Valide Sultan, Queen Mother, to the new child ruler. Talk about historical irony. The future of the empire literally came from the one concubine Ibrahim didn't manage to kill. With Mehmed IV on the throne, Kösem and Turhan Sultan would vie for power as regents, and the empire tried to regain stability after Ibrahim's reign of terror. As for Shekapare, the favorite concubine who had whispered that fateful accusation, she didn't escape retribution either. Many say that not long after the harem massacre, Kösem Sultan took matters into her own hands against this troublemaker. Kösem invited Shekapare to a pleasant dinner and had her poisoned, some say strangled. The Sultan's mother quietly eliminated the instigator who had lit the fuse of Ibrahim's insanity. So in the end, the schemer got her karma, and the chapter of the mass drowning closed with all its main actors meeting a grim fate. The story of Sultan Ibrahim the Mad and the night he drowned 280 concubines is one of the darkest, most jaw-dropping tales in all of history. It's almost hard to believe it happened. It sounds like a grotesque fairy tale or a nightmare. Yet, whether exaggerated by legend or not, it carries a stark lesson. Absolute power in the hands of a madman can lead to absolute catastrophe. Ibrahim's life was a perfect storm of personal trauma, unchecked authority, and twisted indulgence. And the results were catastrophic. Innocent lives lost in horrifying ways, a once great leader reduced to a monster, and an empire shaken to its core. What can we, living in the modern world, take away from this? First, it makes us appreciate the importance of mental health and stable governance. A ruler with severe issues and no accountability is a recipe for disaster. Second, it's a reminder that no matter how powerful someone is, cruelty and injustice will catch up with them eventually. Ibrahim thought he could get away with anything, and for a while he did. But his own people brought him to justice in the end. Finally, this tale sheds light on the very real people who suffered under his tyranny, especially the women of the harem who had no voice. Their story, as tragic as it is, deserves to be remembered so that such cruelty is never repeated. History isn't always pretty, and this story was as dark as it gets, but you stuck with it to the end. Thank you for watching and learning about this unbelievable chapter of the past. If this story blew your mind or gave you chills, don't forget to hit that like button to let us know. Leave a comment about what shocked you the most. Was it the mass drowning, the concubines' betrayal, or the Sultan's crazy luxuries? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe for more fascinating and intense history stories, because truth really is stranger than fiction. And if you're hungry for another wild tale, check out our next video. We've got plenty more unbelievable history coming your way. Thank you for watching, and until next time, remember, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Stay curious and stay safe.